In the Voice of Russia World Service, welcome to another edition of the Christian Message from Moscow. Today we shall acquaint you with the Orthodox view on euthanasia. In 1936, in Nazi Germany, Dr. Helmut Unger published the history of a doctor who put his wife, suffering from extensive sclerosis, out of her misery. A film was made based on the story, arousing widespread sympathies of the public, deeply moved by the notion of death out of mercy. Soon Hitler was accosted by a father whose child was terminally ill, begging for permission to allow doctors to help the child die. Hitler passed the affair over to his personal doctor, Karl Brandt, who granted the request. In 1939, Hitler entrusted Dr. Brandt and his associates with giving out permission for doctors to grant a merciful death to those patients who were deemed terminally ill. Soon, the first Hungerhaus appeared in Germany, a medical institution where terminally ill infants and senior citizens were starved to death. In the period from 1939 until 1941, euthanasia became a routine thing. Fatally ill patients, cripples, and the mentally disabled were systematically killed in gas chambers at the instructions of the medics. Thus, in those years, some 70,000 people were killed in line with the euthanasia program, while, up to the moment of the end of World War II, the overall number of victims of the program, by estimates of the Nuremberg trial, comprised 275,000. At the Nuremberg trial, Dr. Brandt said,
"My principal motive was a desire to help those individuals who could not help themselves and were only prolonging their sufferings. To quote the oath of Hippocrates, today is to pronounce that invalids and people suffering pain cannot even be given poison. However, any contemporary doctor who makes such a rhetorical and peremptory statement is either a liar or a hypocrite. All I did was curtail the sufferings of these unfortunate people."
A similar argumentation lies at the heart of advocates of the modern-day theory of euthanasia, a theory finding ever more proponents amongst European lawmakers, insists Bishop of Austria and Vienna Ilarion Alfeev, a representative of the Russian Orthodox Church at the European International Organizations, Doctor of Philosophy of Oxford University, Doctor of Theology at St. Sergius Orthodox Theological Institute in Paris, private docent of Freiburg University in Switzerland. Bishop Ilarion voices the opinion of the Russian Orthodox Church. Today we'd like to familiarize you with his article on euthanasia, taken from the Orthodox magazine, The Church and Time.
The inhuman essence of the contemporary atheist humanism is revealed with particular clarity in the recently unfolding debate about euthanasia, where the humanists persistently insist on a right to death for terminally ill patients. The more radically minded humanists go even further and assert that the right to death should be granted to all people, including the healthy, and that every person who desires to part with life can either commit suicide by themselves or turn to the medics for help in the matter. In many countries of the West, there are societies which popularize the notion of euthanasia and suicide. In France, there is the Association of the Right to Die with Dignity. In America, the Helmut Society has existed for almost 20 years. It numbers around 25,000 members. Its motto is, "A good life, a good death." The founder of the society, Derek Humphrey, is the author of the book Final Exit, a manual of sorts on how to commit suicide. This book abounds in advice on how to commit suicide, either on one's own or with somebody's aid. There are charts with the various lethal doses of diverse medicines. The advantages of cyanide are reflected on. Various suggestions are made for those opting for suffocation, ranging from polyethylene bag to exhaust fumes. Humphrey substantiated his ideas in practice, helping his wife, brother, and father-in-law die. The wife and her father took sleeping pills at Humphrey's advice, while he killed his brother by breaking the artificial life support system he was on. Contemporary proponents of euthanasia reject any connection between their ideas and the processes that took place in Nazi Germany. In the meantime, it was there that the theory of euthanasia was first developed and implemented. In the years after the war, euthanasia was under ban in all countries of Europe. In a majority of Western countries, it is still illegal, although in actual fact, instances of euthanasia are increasing. A gradually altered public attitude towards euthanasia has resulted in the fact that in 2 European countries, the Netherlands and Belgium, laws were adopted in 2002 according to which doctors who aid fatally ill people commit suicide are free of any criminal responsibility. Quite obviously, similar norms shall very soon be introduced in other European countries, and might very well enter the legislation of the European Union. The Council of Europe is already debating a resolution on the need of bringing legislative norms in line with the existing practice and thus legalizing active euthanasia, in other words, the right of doctors to terminate the life of a patient in response to their persistent, voluntary, and well-considered request. For the time being, we aren't looking at a program on systematic destruction of terminally ill patients, similarly to the one implemented in Hitler's Germany. But where is the guarantee that after overruling one ban, the European lawmakers won't go further? And, of course, exclusively out of humane considerations, lift the other restrictions. Speaking out against euthanasia today are representatives of the traditional churches, including the Catholic and Orthodox. A cardinally different opinion on euthanasia and suicide between the Christian tradition and secular liberal humanism is based on the difference of their initial premises and concepts of life and death. In liberal humanism, both issues are regarded first of all in the context of men's rights. Every person, believes the liberalism, is master of their life, so if they are tired of it, they have the right to cut it short. In the Christian tradition, quite the opposite, God is the one who rules over life and death. So the Orthodox Church regards suicide as a mortal sin and equals euthanasia to suicide or murder, depending on whether the patient participates in it. The Orthodox Church cannot condone as morally acceptable the persistently widespread in society attempts to legalize the so-called euthanasia, in other words, intentional killing of fatally ill patients, including at their own will. The request of a patient to hasten his death is often governed by a state of depression, robbing them of the ability to correctly assess their state and situation. The Catholic Church, likewise, believes euthanasia morally unacceptable, calling it murder which gravely undermines man's dignity and disregards our respect of the Lord our Maker. A liberal approach views man's life as an absolute, ultimate gift, while illness and death are regarded as evil. In the Christian tradition, life on earth isn't regarded of absolute value, since Christians proceed from the assumption that life is eternal. Illness is viewed as a test of endurance that can bring one spiritual benefit, and death as a transition into another world. A non-religious person fears death, fears the mere thought of death, preparation for death, and any fatal illness. This explains the widespread view on a sudden death being the more preferable. Christians, quite the opposite, prepare for death and at the same time pray that God might spare them from sudden death, considering it a blessing to have the opportunity to ready themselves for the spiritually important period in the life of a person. Surrounded by Christian care during one's final days on earth, the dying person is quite capable of experiencing a spiritual rebirth, a turnaround linked with a reassessment of one's life and a repentance of one's sins in the face of eternity. A person who commits suicide, or one who has been subjected to euthanasia, is deprived of this opportunity. The issue of euthanasia is imbued with a series of additional moral collisions. Thus, there is the question of the role and functions of a doctor. According to many centuries-old religious notions, deeply rooted in our consciousness, the doctor's task is to treat illnesses and preserve a patient's life, rather than cut it short. The oath of Hippocrates goes, "I shall never administer a medicine that carries death, even if they beg me for it." A doctor who aids and abets in claiming the life of a patient, even if this occurs with the consent and at the request of the patient, takes on the functions of executioner. Thus, the moral criterion, which for the centuries rendered the profession of a medic so honorable and thanks to which a patient entrusted his life to him, is reduced to naught. The legalization of euthanasia shall render such trust out of the question. Moreover, it shall open the door to transforming doctors into serial killers. One such serial killer in medical robes was Englishman Harold Shipman, who hanged himself in his prison cell in January 2004. He was indicted on charge of murdering 352 patients, which he put to death in the course of his many years of medical practice. However, according to indictment, Shipman was a maniac, and his actions were in no way motivated by humane reasons. Yet, if medics are granted an official license to kill, where is the guarantee the patients will be safeguarded against new shipments? And how can the medics exclude the possibility of serial killers emerging in their midst? Another moral issue indirectly linked with euthanasia has to do with the gradual shift in the numerical correlation of youth and senior citizens in Western countries. In 2002, a report was prepared at the UN, according to which the present process of aging of the population in the modern world has no analogues in the history of humanity. The alarming increment of senior citizens aged 60 and upwards is accompanied by a decline of young people aged under 15. By the year 2050, the number of old people in the world will exceed the number of young for the first time in the history of mankind. This process is particularly speeding up in developed countries of the West, where it is determined both by the increasing fall in the birth rate and the prolongation of the lifespan due to improved medical care, and a number of other factors. However, the higher the average age of the population of a certain country, the greater the financial burden that every young person of the state will have to shoulder, since they will have to pay higher taxes towards the upkeeping of the growing army of senior citizens. In this situation, euthanasia might turn out a welcome measure, as an easy means of evading the necessity of spending vast sums on the senior folk. The latter will be increasingly more often reminded about their right to death and the possibility to live with dignity. At times it seems we are living in an upside-down world, a world where the scale of values is overturned, where good is dubbed evil and evil good, life dubbed death, and death life. Values based on the religious moral ideals, still traditional for a majority of people on the planet, are systematically subjected to violation, while new moral criteria, which haven't yet put down roots and contradict the very nature of mankind, are eagerly inculcated in the masses. Millions of unborn infants are deprived of life, while the old people and terminally ill are offered the right to death. Ideals of family, marriage, conjugal fidelity, childbirth are ridiculed and mocked, while sexual perversions, free love, are actively encouraged. The plague of bellicose godlessness and liberalism has affected millions of people in the West. In the case of some, it has robbed them of life. Others have been denied the chance to be born. Still others have been granted the right to live with dignity. However, atheist humanists are rubbing their hands gleefully, announcing that the problem of population growth in developed countries of Europe and North America has been settled successfully. They prefer not to notice that the universal reappraisal of values has already plunged the Western civilization into a demographic abyss and now threatens with global conflict of civilizations, should the epidemic of liberalism spread to other regions of the world. Today, every religious person in the West should stop to think of their own future and that of their offspring, their country, and their civilization. Believers should become aware of the responsibility that lies on their shoulders and enter a dialogue with the secular outlook. If the dialogue is impossible, then an open conflict is called for. The believers should remind the Western civilization of the ideological choice their very future hinges on. The essence of this choice cannot be put better than it was done by Moses, as he addressed the people of Israel. See, I have set before thee this day life and good, and death and evil. In that I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, and his statutes, and his judgment, that thou mayst live and multiply. And the Lord thy God shall bless thee in the land whither thou goest to possess it. But if thy heart turn away, so that thou wilt not hear, but shalt be drawn away, I denounce unto you this day, that ye shall surely perish, and that ye shall not prolong your days upon the land. I call heaven and to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live.
You were listening to an excerpt from an article by Bishop of Austria and Vienna Ilarion, a representative of the Russian Orthodox Church at the European organizations. The article is devoted to traditional and liberal values and the debate between Christianity and Western civilization. The excerpt we read out today highlighted the Orthodox view on euthanasia. And there we end another edition of The Christian Message from Moscow. Directed by Vladimir Dyomin, editor of text and music Tatiana Shvitsova, sound engineer Yelena Gashenikova, and your hosts Svetlana Yakimenko
and Pavel Novichkov.
Do join us for the next edition in a week's time. All the very best to you, and God preserve you from all evil, seen and unseen.